All right, it's streaming. We're live.
It's streaming.
Mics are working.
Yeah, everything's
Okay.
live. You might want to.
The union.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, the one who has you, the one.
Might have to.
Yeah, you have one that, that's the. Oh, sorry, I'll put it extra. Okay.
Oh, that too.
Yeah.
So. This one. Is. Burning out. Only this kind of run deal, so it might be a little bit late. So could we just hold off and this until we get to it? And bump it down. So, yeah. Is there anybody other than the absent last week? No. No, everybody else is here.
Right, so we have enough to go for the minutes. John, Allison, Chappie and now.
All right, it's 5:15, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is the March 5th, 2024 meeting of the City of Charleston Board of Zoning Appeals, zoning. Present here today are board members Allison Grass, Hal Morrison, John Bennett, Chappie McKay, and legal chair Jeff Tibbles. Present for the zoning staff are Lou Batchelder, Penny Ashby, and Emma McQuarrie. These proceedings are being recorded, and we ask that those who speak, please identify yourself for the record. We will conduct this meeting in the usual fashion. We will first receive information from city staff about the application and their recommendation. If the recommendation is favorable and no one objects to the application, the matter is uncontested. The Board of Zoning Appeals usually, but not always, approves uncontested applications. For all applications, the board reserves the right to ask questions of the staff, applicant, and or others in attendance prior to rendering a decision. If, however, the city recommends against the application, or if there is opposition to the application, we treat the application as contested and hear from the applicant and anyone else who is in favor of the application. Next, we hear from anyone opposed, followed by a short rebuttal from the applicant. We then close the public hearing portion of the meeting for that particular application and open discussion for the Board of Zoning Appeals members only. We will then make a decision to approve with conditions, or deny the application. The Board of Zoning Appeals zoning has the authority to do three things. Number one, hear appeals to decisions of the zoning administrator. Number two, grant special exceptions, a fact-finding function of the board. And number three, grant variances to the zoning ordinance if the application meets the hardship test outlined in section 54-924 of the ordinance. The board may deliberate and make a final decision on a matter by a majority vote of members present at the hearing and qualified to vote, provided that not less than a quorum is present and qualified to vote. However, an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the board members present and voting shall be required before a use variance may be granted. For a variance to be granted, the Board of Zoning Appeals must make the following findings. A, if there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. B, these conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. C, because of these conditions, the application of the ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. And D, the authorization of a variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. I'm required by our city's ordinance to ask that anybody who intends to speak tonight be sworn under oath. Please, if you intend to speak, raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You'll signify by saying, "I do." Thank you. There's a couple of deferrals on tonight's agenda. One is A2, which was just deferred by the applicant, and the other is B2. So the application for 60 Spring Street and the application for 584 Meeting Street, those will not proceed this evening. If you're here for one of those applications, you may be excused. So the first item on our agenda this evening is A1. A is review of minutes and deferred applications from previously advertised BZA-Z agendas. Number one, review of minutes of the February 20th, 2024 meeting. The four members to my left were here in attendance on 220. That package of meeting minutes is in your packet. So do I have a motion? Motion for approval. Mr. McKay moves to approve. Second. Mr. Bennett seconds the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed. The ayes have it. The minutes passed by a vote of 4-0. I had to abstain because I was not in attendance 2 weeks ago. All right, the next item on our agenda, because A2 is deferred, we're moving to A3. A3 is an application for 113 Cumming Street in Radcliffe Borough Council District Number 6, TMS number 460-16-03-033, Zone DR2, requesting a special exception under Section 55-110 to allow an extension of a non-conforming use by allowing a rear addition that enlarges 2 of the 4 dwelling units on a property that is limited by zoning to 2 dwelling units. Requesting a variance from Section 54-301 to allow a 2-story rear addition and a 2-story piazza extension having a 46% lot occupancy. 35% is the limit. Existing lot occupancy is 40%. The owner is Cumming Street Holdings LLC. The applicant, Edward Thompson, Thompson Home Design. Mr. Batchelder.
113 Cumming Street is a residentially zoned property in Radcliffe Borough. It's just north of Duncan Street, south of Vandross Street. And mid-block, as you can see on this zoning map, it has 2 structures on it. Each structure contains 2 dwelling units. And what we're dealing with tonight is the rear building. And here's an aerial view. It's the building back here that we're concerned with tonight. The building in the front is not changing, or at least there are no changes that require your approval. Application materials submitted, explanation for their request for the special exception and variance. These are photographs of the building in the back, and it has been undergoing some demolition and stabilization, has some issues with it. And So a new owner is taking this project on. I think this property was in the same ownership for a long time and then was sold recently. So in need of a lot of attention. In fact, you'll see, you can kind of see it here, but in the back here, this back portion of this building is it looks like it's collapsing, but I'm not sure if that was intended to be that way or it's just sufferings from some kind of structural failure. But so they've gone through the BAR, they've gotten their approvals from the BAR to do this work, but they want to make changes to this building footprint that will increase the overall square footage of conditioned living space, but not increase the number of bedrooms. And because this is a non-conforming use for dwelling units on this property, when only I think maybe 2 are permitted, any increase in the size of any one of those units requires your approval as a special exception to extend a non-conforming use. And there are considerations for you to look at. Physical extensions of non-conforming setbacks require light and air impacts on adjoining properties to be considered. Parking impacts in this kind of situation would be something to consider. But there's really not really any significant change in how the property is being used. It's just being improved and enlarged slightly. So I'll show you the plans that were submitted. And I kind of pulled out some slides just to kind of abbreviate the presentation, thinking that there would not be any opposition to this. And that we might have had a long discussion for the prior item that was just deferred. So, but in this image right here, you have 2 surveys. This survey is the existing condition. So you see the building in the back right here, configured that way. On the right is the drawing that illustrates what they would like to do. So they'd like to just basically make it a solid rectangle by filling in this area where this porch was located and making that a 2-story piazza and enclosed living space back here, as you'll see on the floor plans. So that change increases the overall lot occupancy of buildings on the property from 40% to 46%, and that requires the variance because the zoning of the property limits the lot occupancy to 35%. And I would just point out that lot occupancy is not necessarily uncommon. You see some of these other lots, they all have the same lot occupancy restriction, but there are very high percentages of lot occupancy on some of these properties in this immediate area. So the percentage that they're requesting, 46%, is not unreasonable in my opinion. So these plans illustrate more precisely what they're doing. Existing footprint is on the left, and this is the proposed footprint. The shaded areas are the additional building lot occupancy that they're proposing with the changes. And this becomes a 2-story piazza in this area right here, I think. And I'll show you the plans. So existing configuration right here. And these are the proposed elevations right here. So you have that piazza that provides the stair access to the 2nd floor. And then this area right here is the additional conditioned living space on both floors. And then I'll run through the other slides. let's see. More elevations of the existing building. See that it has some sort of issue with the back portion. And more images. Again, that slide that I just showed you. Dimensions. Okay, so here are the floor plans. So this is the existing floor plan on the first floor. This is proposed. Same on the second over here. And so anyway, it's a nice improvement to the property. And the owner has spoken to neighbors, and I know that at least two of the neighbors are supportive. In your packet, in your public comment packet, there was a letter that was signed back in it was dated December 3rd, 2023. And this is a letter indicating support from the neighbor immediately north of the property at 119 Cumming Street, the owner of that property, and then a neighbor to the south at 115 Cumming Street. And the other thing I'll just mention is that this had been scheduled to come before the board in January, I believe it was, at our meeting in January. And we had the drawings and we reviewed them. And at that time, instead of altering this rear building so that it looked like this, they were actually proposing to add a room on the back of this footprint back here. And that would be the additional living space and the additional bedroom. And I did not think that was the appropriate solution to the issue. So we met and talked about it and decided that the better solution would be to infill this area right here and turn that into a two-story piazza and conditioned living space back here like they're proposing. And I think it works much better than the previous plan that they had. So for all those reasons, I think they satisfy the zoning requirements for the special exception and the variance to have that slight increase in the overall lot occupancy of buildings on the site. And I recommend approval of this.
Thank you, Lee. Is there anyone here who wants to speak in opposition to the application for 113 Cumming Street? If you hear an opposition, please raise your hand. All right. Do we have the owner or the applicant here for 113 Cumming? Anything you'd like to say to the board? All right. Any questions for city? Questions for the owner or applicant? All right, Mr. Morrison moves to approve. Mr. Bass seconds the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed. The motion passes. So the special exception and the variance for 113 Cumming Street of Brandon. Thank you very much, sir. All right. The next item on our agenda, B4, 360 King Street, Peninsula, Council District number 8. PMS number 457-04-02-018, zone GBA. Requesting a special exception under section 54-220 to allow a 12-unit accommodations use in a GBA, general business accommodations zone district. The owner is Janelli 73 LLC, Eric Johnson, sole member owner, applicant William Stroud, Esquire, Mr. Batchelder.
360 King Street came before the board last April 4th of 2023 for a special exception to allow a 12-unit accommodations use at this location. And just to refresh your memory, this is the building that sits on the corner of Burns Lane and King Street. It is the Yeti building. There's an image, this this building right here. And here's the King Street elevation, front of the building. Has the Yeti store on the first floor, 2 floors above, and each floor has 6 apartments, and the request was to convert those to 12 accommodations units. So we heard the request, and the staff objected to this because we felt that it was not meeting the special exception requirements, specifically the conversion of dwelling units to accommodations units, and the board, after hearing from the applicant, denied the request. They subsequently appealed in circuit court, and ultimately a judge ruled on the case and ruled in favor of the applicant, and remanded this back to the board for us to approve it. So that's why this is coming back before you. It was on the agenda 2 weeks ago. And at that point, we discovered that the proposed meeting and conference space in the building to satisfy the requirement that there'll be 480 square feet of meeting and conference space, that measurement that was shown on the plans, on these floor plans that were submitted by the applicant, actually was not accurate, that they did not have the square footage for the area that they were proposing. So that caused them to go back and rethink this. And so they've found this space right here, which is unit 203, 501 square feet, 501 square foot unit, and they're designating that as their meeting conference space. So that would be sufficient to meet the 480 square feet that they're required to have for 12 units. So that solves that issue, but they had to make that change to the plan so that we could get that before the board. So with that change, our recommendation is for approval of this request. And I know the applicant's here, and we have Ms. Creech of the city attorney's office here as well, if you have any questions about this matter. And you saw the case was actually, the order from the judge was actually part of the image overview. So if you happen to notice that and read it, have any questions about that?
All right, thank you, Lee. Anyone here to speak in opposition to the application for 360 King Street? If you're in opposition, just raise your hand. I see no one in opposition.
We did have these letters from the Preservation Society and an email from the Historic Charleston Foundation as well that I'll just point out, but yeah. And the Preservation Society letter was part of the image public comment packet she received.
All right, thank you, Lee. We have the owner or applicant here. Anything you'd like to address with the board?
I have no additional comments unless you have questions.
All right, any questions for the city? Questions for the owner or applicant? All right, Mr. Bennett moves to approve. Mr. McKay seconds the motion. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. The motion is granted, and the special exception for 360 King Street is approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on our agenda. We have Mr. Maybank here, yeah. All right, the owner of the property on the agenda, at B1 is apparently.
Yeah, so I had one line saying Columbia, who's on his way.
Right,
Do not say the first,
yes, and that's my intention. So, I was trying to see whether or not he was here. We'll push it until he gets here. So That's going to take us past B2, which is deferred. It's going to take us to B3. Item B3 on the agenda is 2100 Booker Street, Silver Hill, Council District number 4, PMS number 464-10-00-046, zone SR1, requesting a special exception under section 54-501 to allow construction of a single-family residence on a lot of insufficient size. The lot area is 2,723 square feet, 9,000 square feet required, requesting a variance from section 54-301 to allow construction of a single-family residence having a 5-foot east side setback, a 5-foot rear setback, a 47% lot occupancy, 9 feet, 25 feet, and a 35% lot occupancy are the limitations. Only applicant is Demond McElveen, Mr. Batchelder.
This is a residential lot in Silver Hill, which is a small residential area off of King Street Extension. And back in 1977 is when the city annexed this area. And I don't know what the city was thinking, but they gave this little neighborhood an SR1 zoning designation, which requires a minimum lot size of 9,000 square feet. And when you couple that with the requirement in the ordinance, it says if you don't have enough lot area to meet the requirement, you have to come before the board and get your approval for a construction of a residence on the lot. Anyway, it just didn't make any sense to me why that was done, but it was done, and that's what exists in this neighborhood. So the lot, according to your agenda and the information that we received from the applicant, is only 2,723 square feet in size. So it's quite small. But that's typical of the neighborhood, as you can see. So we've got the vacant lot right here. And lots of the lots have homes on them. A few don't. But they would like to construct a new single-family home on this lot. This is an aerial view showing the lot right here. And then the applicant's materials. Here's an image of the lot right on the corner. And another image looking down Booker Street. The lot is right down here. We're dealing with tonight. This is a site plan showing the proposed house footprint. It's actually got a 7-foot east side setback, not 5 feet that's listed here. And then a 5-foot rear setback. It's back here. And a 47% lot occupancy. The driveway for parking is over here. So fits very nicely on this lot, like similar to other homes in the neighborhood. And just go through the slides on the proposed house. It's a 2-story house. First floor and second floor shown here. Roof elevations. So those are the requests that are before you. And again, what they're proposing is very typical of what you have in that neighborhood. We've approved some new homes to be constructed, but there are other homes that have been there for many years. So this is clearly a variant situation and an appropriate lot for a single family home. So my recommendation is for approval.
All right, thank you, Lee. Anybody here in opposition to the application for 2100 Booker Street? Be in opposition, raise your hand. Nobody here is here to speak in opposition. Do we have the owner or the applicant? Yes, sir. Anything you'd like to say before? Anybody have any questions for the city, questions for the owner, applicant? All right, Mr. Aspen to approve. Mr. Morrison seconds the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. The motion is granted unanimously in the special exception variance for 2100 Booker Street in Brandon. Thank you so much. All right, the next item on our agenda. B4, 27 North Enston Avenue, North Central, Council District number 4, TMS number 463-08-01-007, Zone SR2, requesting a special exception under section 54-110 to allow a one-story rear addition, bedroom, bath, laundry room that extends a non-conforming 3-foot north side setback, 9 feet required. Requesting a variance from section 54-301 to allow a rear addition with a 20-foot rear setback, 25 feet required. The owner applicant is Elaine K. Severses. If I said that right. Mr. Batchel.
This is a one-story home in North Central, and they're asking for a one-story rear addition. You can see it here on the zoning map. The existing house. And another aerial view showing the house. Application materials, survey. So this, this shows you where the addition is proposed. This is the existing rear part of the house, and these are the setback lines that are reflect the required building setbacks on the lot. So the addition, as you can see, encroaches into the setback areas, and that's the request that's before you tonight. The special exception is to allow the extension of this non-conforming north side setback right here with this part of the building. And then the variance is to allow the rear addition with a 20-foot setback instead of a 25-foot requirement. These are just images of the proposed addition on the back of the existing home. Letters, we've got a number of letters, but the important thing is that the neighbor to the rear and the neighbor to the north and the south have submitted these letters indicating their support for the request. And 128 Magnolia is the neighbor to the rear. And I think 31 is the north, and 23 is the south. So these are the two adjoining neighbors in north and south. And then other neighbors who also indicated their support. So I think they satisfy the special exception requirements. And again, the setback requirements on these lots in this neighborhood are not don't match the actual pattern of homes being constructed on the lots. So we always have these kind of conflicts whenever anybody wants to build an addition. And this is certainly a very reasonable sized addition to the rear of this house, one story like the house. So our recommendation is for approval.
All right, thank you, Lee. Anybody here to speak in opposition to the request for 27 North Enston Avenue? In opposition, because I know that here is here to speak in opposition. Do we have the owner or applicant here? Yes, and anything you'd like to say to the board?
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh, they're correcting me on the pronunciation.
It's okay. Everyone but
Will you pronounce it for me?
Savanese.
Savanese, thank you. All right, Mrs. Savanese, we'll let you know if we have any questions for Lee, any questions for the owner or applicant. Aye, Mr. Bennett moves to approve. Mr. Morrison seconds the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed. The motion passes unanimously, and the special exception and variance for 27 North Henston Avenue are granted. Thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda is B5, 1407 Downing Street, Ashley Hall Manor, Council District Number 9, PMS number 352-14-00-112, zone SR1, requesting a variance after the fact from section 54-301 to allow an existing 6-foot tall fence to be extended to 8 feet, 6-foot height limitation. Owner applicant Patricia Lewis and Thomas Bryan. Mr. Batchel.
This is a residential property in Ashley Hall Manor, a neighborhood in West Ashley. And zoning map here shows a location of the property right here and the footprint of the house that's on that lot. This is Sam Rittenberg right here. And then there's a frontage road that provides access to these homes. So Manor Boulevard. Aerial photo here. This is an image from Google Street View that shows the 6-foot fence that was here for some time. And then the fence was extended by the current owners of the property. And that's what is bringing this matter to you tonight. So this is the application. They submitted their request and reason for the increase in height. These are images showing the fence. So there's a fence that comes all the way down, I think right about here. And then other images of the fence in different locations. So this is that same part of the fence, I guess, because that's the van. That's the van right there. So more photos. Backyard, side yard. So the applicant has cited noise from Sam Rittenberg as being one of the reasons for the increase in height. One of the reasons for why they feel they meet the variance test. And then they've cited some other fences that are in the neighborhood. 1407 Downing Street is the property that we're talking about, but there are some other ones that they have images of. And so on the left, this image right here, this is a fence that the board actually approved in July of last year. This is 1452 Salisbury Street. This is the side road. I don't remember the name of the street. And then this is Orange Grove Road right back here. And so this lot backs up to Orange Grove Road, and this homeowner came before the board requesting your approval to build an 8-foot fence from this point on back and then along the rear property line that abuts Orange Grove Road, and then turning the corner a little bit right here. But it's at the very back portion of the rear yard and abutting Orange Grove Road and this entrance street into the neighborhood. And that was the only area where they were requesting the 8-foot fence. And this fence on the other side of this entrance road into the neighborhood, this is a 6-foot fence here, but then there's a taller fence that backs up to Orange Grove Road right here. I don't know how long that's been there, but we don't have a record of any permit being approved for this fence. Not to say that it didn't receive some sort of approval from the city, but we don't have a record in our files of that. And that's only along the Orange Grove Road portion of the lot that actually abuts that street. And these are more images of that fence. And then these are signatures from two of the adjoining neighbors, I think, to 1407 Downing Street. This is a Manor Boulevard resident right here, a Downing Street resident here, indicating they don't there's a reference to signatures in here. We're asking at you as our neighbors if you have any complaints about the fence topper. If not, would you please sign the letter and give your address? So these folks have done that, indicating that they don't object to this fence. But in my opinion, I don't see where there's a true hardship that justifies the granting of the variance for this particular lot. It's not on Sam Rittenberg, it's not on Orange Grove Road. It's not unique in any way, because other lots are in this similar situation in the neighborhood and don't have tall fences. So that, I don't think that's a reasonable justification. And there's only one other home that I'm aware of that does have a taller fence. And there could be other ones, but in that area of the neighborhood, there's another fence that we actually had an application come through the board last November for 1441 Salisbury. And in that instance, we determined that the variance was not needed because it already had a section of an 8-foot fence. And he was simply trying to extend the fence, the 8-foot fence, around the rear portion of the backyard. So this one, the other thing about this is it comes up along the side yard of the house and actually a little bit beyond the front of the house. So where they've extended it to 8 feet. So this is an after the fact application, correct? Right. So, and we did find that actually for a prior homeowner, I think we found a permit for the 6-foot fence that is there today, and that was back in 2010. So, so anyway, that concludes my presentation. I did send an email to the applicant last Wednesday, just notifying them that I had reviewed their application and determined that I would not be able to support the request because of I didn't think it satisfied the 4-part variance test. And so I never heard back, but I assume they're here tonight and may want to address the board. But those are my thoughts on this.
All right, thank you, Lee. Anybody here in opposition to the application that's 1407 Downing Street?
And I think you got one letter, I'm sorry, I think you got one letter in your packet. Your public comment packet from somebody that objected to it.
Seeing no one here to speak in opposition, do we have the owner of the applicants here present this evening? Would you like to address the board?
Yes, sir.
Please come on up to the podium.
Hi, I'm Pat Lewis. My husband, Charlie Bryan. And we understand that we are the ones ultimately responsible for what having put the top up of the fence. Even though we had a fence company do it, and we had assumed our fault that they had gotten a permit, and obviously they did not. We did not know anything that was wrong with it until we got to stop work from it, or stop work notice. And so that's why we decided to write the letter appealing to the board. We are less than a half a block off the highway on San Rittenberg, and it is extremely loud every day, all day. So the Tonka has helped some, and we are also trying to sell our house, and every person that has come and looked at the house has made negative comments about the road noise. And you know, there are several other homes within the neighborhood that do have 8-foot fences. And so they're not anywhere near the road, like highway rather, that we are, but I don't know that that makes any difference, but that's what we're asking to possibly keep the fence off it, because we didn't deliberately do it. We thought that we built it, yes, but we thought that the fence people did have a permit, and we do have receipts from them that we paid for that. So that's,
Yes, there is not a HOA. We didn't really think about it. So we kind of relied on fence company. Now, there are, I went around kind of looking, and at least 12 in the neighborhood with partial or full over 6 foot. I don't know if any of them, the one they had there. Yeah. But, other than that, I don't, nobody has said anything about it. Most of them look fairly old. So we're just asking to keep our people. No.
Okay, and so the work that you had done, in my understanding that there was a 6-foot fence there to begin with, and then you all just extended it by a couple feet, so
Yes,
right? Okay, and was that work completed, or was that?
Yes,
work-
sir.
Okay.
it was completed back in November.
Okay. So when you were issued the stop work order, that the work had already been.
Oh, and it
completed.
did that, yeah.
Yeah.
We got that. On the 26th of January.
Okay, so there was nothing to be stopped at that point in time. All right, anybody have any questions for the owners? Thank you very much, Ms. Lewis. Mr. Ford will let you know if there's other questions that may arise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like you might have a question.
Did you consider at all, because you mentioned some of the examples that you showed, they were only in the rear
Mhm.
portion, did you consider allowing them to have the rear portion of the road to extend to 8 feet?
Well, I thought about that and I thought well, maybe they would respond to my email and we could talk about that. But I didn't get a response, so I never had that conversation. I mean, this fence, as you can see, clearly comes up along the side of the house and into the front yard a little bit on each side. And images. So yeah, that clearly what you can see in the front yard and probably for some distance down the side is what, in my opinion, is the most inappropriate in terms of the regulation and yeah. Good. So there's the fence right now, I guess is coming up sort of in this area. Yeah, on each side.
Can you forward a couple of slides? Yeah, okay. What's over here on the left? Front of there. That's. It's a different house there.
This-
It's on this property.
Yeah, so this would be on the property on the corner. This property right here.
And is that picture taken before or after the work?
This one was before,
So it's a 6 foot fence.
exactly. This is the 6 foot fence that we approved, I guess, back in 2010.
A conversation best allowed to defer it until Wednesday. Speak to the.
Anything that fits on the lot. Things to get done.
Well, there are a lot of lots. This is one end of the neighborhood, then it extends further down to the, off the image here.
Ms. Lewis, Mr. Floyd, did you all receive Mr. Batchelder's email? Do you know?
Just, yes, sir.
Okay. Have you all responded?
That's how we can know.
Okay,
Discouraged when we got it.
right, I understand.
That's why we decided that we've got to calm down and be able to try to speak somewhat in our defense. That was the other thing. Do,
Sure, no, it's perfectly reasonable, I appreciate it. That's-
What I was just saying, you know, if we had any questions, it's gone to. We'll come down and do.
So, Bass, what were you saying about the referral?
I was just wondering if the board, you know, any sort of, mention to me to defer it so that they can have a conversation about.
Yeah, I'd be interested in some documentation about. The applicant statement, that it's well, problems related to the fences. You know, other questions, I mean, it sounds from Sam, obviously not a big, right, problem stuff. And I worked with, we've had fence issues before, and problem is, it's hard to deny anyway. It's inside. The one who had a little reach, so good. Everybody. Think it's a little bit less. Noise and standing. It's all fed. Even I. No, tons of questions. I'd like to see, I'll back you on this. For more information. Please, they get a building permit. For the fence.
Well, they didn't, there was no permit that was issued for the extension of the fence. Because to get a building permit, it has to go through us.
To the contractor.
Correct. Right.
I have a question on the deferral, and what is it what is it that would be discussed in an intervening time?
Well, I'm happy to discuss with the applicants, where these other fences are and, you know, consider what they might offer as a compromise to their request.
Okay, and on the, yeah,
I think it would be beneficial if we grant into the full points to the variance guys, since, as I understand it, that's what we're. That's what. Maybe they have to get something.
Right,
That'd be what- with that.
okay.
and particularly with respect to B, these conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity and C. And yeah, D will not be a detriment because character of the district will not be harmed if it's all over the area, then I suppose we all know that. Is that something that you can help us with? You can do some research and come back. Can you do some research and come back and let us know whether, identify the properties that have the higher fences and put that list together?
We do have addresses.
Okay. Is that something that you all can submit within? What do you think?
Well, they could submit that in a response to my email. Is that possible? Okay, then we can talk. We can talk about them and I can look into them,
Okay,
see what we have.
all right. Any other discussion, questions?
I'll make for deferral.
All right, Ms. Grassfish, you defer the matter. Norris seconds the motion to defer. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed. The motion to defer is granted. We'll see you again, or, hopefully you can work something out with Mr. Batchelder in the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on our agenda is B6 237 Gordon Street, Wagner Terrace, Council District number 6, TMS number 463-10-03-044, zoned SR2, requesting a special exception under section 54-110 to allow a one-story screen porch addition that extends a non-conforming 4.2-foot west side setback 9 feet of required. The owners are Hayes and Emily Sayre. The applicant is Brett Morgan, architect, Mr. Batchelder.
So again, we have a one-story addition to this residential property in Wagner Terrace, and you see here on the zoning map, it's right towards the end of Gordon Street near Lowndes Point. And here's an aerial image. And so this image, which I'm going to just start with, shows you the illustrates the proposed addition, and it's this portion right here, right there. It gets off right there. So everything back here is what they're proposing to add to this property, and the non-conforming side setback is over on this side of the property. So again, I condensed all the slides down, thinking this would be quite a bit later, but I'll just go through them. So these are existing photos of the house, obviously, and this floor plan illustrates where that addition will be, porch addition. So one thing about this, this is the 25-foot rear setback line. And then you can see the side setback line right here. So it's the extension of this non-conforming side setback over here, this west side non-conforming setback, that requires your approval. There's no approval needed for the porch to extend into the rear setback, because porches and stairs can encroach into the rear setback as long as they're at least 10 feet off the rear property line. So,
But not on the side.
not on the side. And so that's the issue before you tonight. And president of the Wagner Terrace Neighborhood Association has submitted a letter saying that they request that this request be approved. So I think it meets all the requirements. There's no light and air issue in that adjoining property owner, one-story addition. And so I recommend approval.
All right, thank you, Lee. Is there anybody here who wishes to speak in opposition to the application for 237 Gordon Street? Seeing no one in opposition, do we have the owner or applicant here? All right, sir, anything you'd like to say to the board? See, yes, sir.
Say a couple moments or comments. I think Lee covered it all.
Please
You
state
guys
your
are-
name for the record.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
My name is Brett Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
So I'm sure you guys are aware, it's a pretty common condition back in Wagner Terrace where really many of the homes don't meet the current setbacks and essentially were constructed at a time with a different zoning ordinance. And so, that's pretty much what we have here for you tonight. Just simply asking to extend what that existing, non-conforming setback is. I think, again, I would say more homes than not have, very similar condition. So that's really all I wanted to add. If there's any questions, I think I can answer.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Any questions for Lee? Any questions for the applicant owners or motion? All right, Ms. Approved, is there a second? All right, Mr. McKay, seconds the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed. The motion passes unanimously, and a special exception for 237 Gordon Street is granted. All right. Saw Mr. Maybank come into the room just in time. We're down to the final agenda item for 114, 116 in Spay. All right. This was item B1, new applications, number 114, 116 East Bay Street, Peninsula Council District number 8, PMS number 458-09-04-022, zoned LB, requesting an appeal to the zoning administrator's approval of a retail and restaurant use on this property. Owner is Maybank Family LLC, Bernard R. Maybank III. Applicant is John C. Hayes. Mr. Battelli.
So 114, 116 East Bay Street concerns property that y'all have seen before. And just quickly to recap, we had this matter come before the board last year, and in that instance, the owner of the business and the owner of the property were appealing my decisions on what they could do and couldn't do on the property as a retail use. And the board upheld my decision, and they appealed for reconsideration. The board denied that appeal. So that brings us to today. The applicants, and in the meantime, the business was located just at 114 or 116 East Bay Street. And now the space at 114 East Bay Street, which is on the south end of the building, has opened up and is available for them to expand into. So two things are happening. They've come up with a proposal to expand the business to include 114 East Bay Street. And they've seen the light, and they understand they've got to comply with the zoning ordinance to convert this into a restaurant use and retail use. They need to find additional parking spaces to meet the city zoning requirement for that type of use, for the restaurant eating and drinking type use. And so they've submitted plans to expand this business and convert it to that new use. And those plans have been submitted through the building permit review process and have been approved. And they've also leased the parking spaces at an adjoining property to satisfy the zoning requirements, in my opinion. And so that's where we are today. And now we've got an appeal from a neighbor who, or neighbors who disagree with that decision. So that's where we are today. I know that the different sides want to rehash everything that happened last year, but I don't think that's germane. I think it's just about the decision that I made on this matter and how I made it and whether that's correct or not. So here's the map, the zoning map showing the property in question. It's addressed as 114 through 120 East Bay Street. And we're talking about the 114, 116 East Bay Street addresses, or the south end of the building. And then, as you can see on the zoning map, this property has a base zoning of limited business. The property around it on that block has a limited business zoning. Property across the street has limited business zoning. The property to the south, across East Elliott Street, has limited business zoning. And further back, it's general office. But nothing around this property in the immediate vicinity is zoned residentially in the city of Charleston. So it might be used residentially, but it's not zoned that way for our designations. Here's the image of the property. Two-story building. They're occupying the ground floor with this proposed business. And then the parking that they've leased is back here off of East Elliott Street. And then they've also added a small little outdoor seating area beyond this wall right here, as you'll see on the plans. These are the plans that were submitted for the building permit to do that interior upfit, to convert the space to that type of use and meet all the building code requirements, fire code, and zoning requirements. And so they show some tables and chairs, counters here, courtyard with their outdoor seating right here. And this is a more detailed view of the floor plan that illustrates the patron use area. That's the area, the square footage of interior area and exterior area where patrons are located, minus the bathrooms, which are not included in that calculation per the ordinance. And the parking requirements are based on those square footages. And so these indoor and outdoor areas require a total of 11 spaces according to our calculations. And the retail use of the indoor space, these two spaces requires 2. Well, those 2 spaces, because of that continuous retail use, and they're not provided, or what we consider to be grandfathered. So they're not required to be provided for the continued retail use of the property, and they wouldn't be required for conversion to a different use. For instance, if you were converting this to office space, I'm sure that space would more than, well, actually 682 square feet would only require 2 parking spaces, just like the retail use in terms of office, converting retail to office. So there would not be an issue with us approving a business license to convert that space to an office space. In this case, they're going to a restaurant use, and that requires more parking. So the difference between what they're grandfathered for and required to provide is what we're looking for in terms of, okay, how are you going to meet these requirements? And so they are able to satisfy that requirement through offsite parking through a long-term lease. And this is the section of the zoning ordinance that explains how they can meet that requirement. Parking may be provided on a properly zoned lot within 400 feet of the building or use, provided, however, with a satisfactory long-term lease with a term of at least 10 years is provided to and approved by the zoning administrator. And then it goes on to say that, and further provided that for eating and drinking places or catering uses, the lot used for the offsite parking shall not adjoin a lot with a residential zoning designation or be separated from a lot with a residential zoning designation by a right-of-way of 55 or less feet. And so that was done a few years ago. That additional provision was done a few years ago because we were concerned about restaurants for jumping further up King Street. And where, you know, a lot of those properties along King Street are zoned general business and, or limited business. But the properties beyond those immediate properties on King Street are residentially zoned. And so there were beginning to be huge impacts for residential areas up on upper King Street. And so we adopted this rule to prevent restaurants from being able to open up there and lease offsite parking close to or adjoining residentially zoned properties, because that becomes an issue when you're people are leaving at night and walking in their cars and slamming doors and turning motors on, and you hear all that stuff at midnight. A lot different than you do at 2 PM. So anyway, we adopted that rule and it's worked well. But in this case, it doesn't apply because all those properties around this property are commercially zoned properties. None of them are residentially zoned. So the applicant found these spaces and was able to lease these spaces right here, these 9 spaces over here for a long-term, through a long-term lease. And they provided that to us and reviewed that with our city attorneys and determined that it was satisfactory and met the requirements. And so we granted our approval for the conversion of that interior space and that courtyard to a restaurant and retail use. And that, so these are the spaces right here. This is a lot where the spaces are located, zoned commercially. And I did not have a drawing from the applicant saying, okay, they meet all those space, the size requirements of parking spaces. But I have ways of looking at these properties with my GIS mapping capabilities and measuring things accurately. And so in this case, I have the ability to see what's there. And those are 4 spaces right there. And then you see the other end of the property right here, where I think they could easily fit 5 spaces here. And then I can measure those areas to determine that they can meet the parking requirements, in my opinion. And so that's what I did. And I determined that they were able to use those spaces to meet the requirement. And that's the basis of my approval. So I think that's the issue for us to look at tonight. And I know that there are concerns out there from neighbors around here, but and I actually hadn't anticipated that they would be able to lease these parking spaces to meet the requirement, but they were. So so at that point, I don't have any choice but to approve the plans if they meet the requirements. These are the kind of things we've done many times over the years with properties around downtown, King Street, Broad Street, Meeting Street, where properties don't have parking. You have to find other spaces somewhere, and that's been done through long-term leases. Not very often, because it's very difficult to tie up a property for 10 years, but it has been done. So that's the basis of my opinion or decision on this. And I know we've got the appellant here, the neighbor, and the attorney who represents another neighbor. And then we've got the owner of the business and the owner of the property here as well. So, and perhaps there will be other people who would like to speak to this matter from the board too.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna give the appellant and whoever is in support of the appeal the first shot, and then we'll hear from the property owner and anybody who is opposed to the appeal. So again, in favor of the appeal would mean disagreement with the zoning administrator's decision to permit the retail and restaurant use here, and the opposition to the appeal will be those who support the zoning administrator's decision to issue those permits. So who wants to start? Mr. Hayes, you're on. Yeah.
Can you remind us before we go through this? The scope of hours to be the no road stretching these. We talked about this.
Yeah, we talked about this. We've got the ordinance as well. Lee, you have a copy of the. And what, we won't belabor that. We'll come back to that, but let's go ahead and hear from Mr. Hayes. I think you were the name's appellant, and so it'd be appropriate to hear from you first, unless you would like somebody else to take your place. Yes, please.
Board members, this fact, I would like to be found consideration today.
It is, I can.
For those who haven't been before, my name is John Hayes. I filed the appeal, on behalf of myself and my neighbors. I just had a recent surgery, so speaking on our behalf, on the appeal, it was John Massel. He can handle the, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes.
Good afternoon, members of the board. You heard I'm John Maslon, and Kevin Mooney, who lives at 21 East Elliott, directly across Elliott Street from this property's engaged me, and I sent some comments in, which hopefully the secretary can avoid. And I have a PowerPoint, few slides to show you about this process. And so Mr. Batchelder mentioned this is not the first or the second, but the third time this practice has been before you. And go to the next slide. And I won't belabor it, but just a quick review. You may recall back in September of 21, you saw some information at a prior meeting where a couple of the neighbors met with the applicant about his plans for this, and were assured that there was not going to be a lot next week. And based on that discussion, they were reassured, and this is in September 24th, 2021. You have probably remember from a prior meeting where the neighbors decided basically not to object to permits that have been requested for this property for not only retail sales, but on premises consumption. And a representation at that time was the on premises consumption was going to be for sample only and not for on-site. And so based on that, the neighbors decided not to object to the ABC or ABL permit. And retail and premises. Next one goes back just a little bit in time to when the CO for the initial retail location officially a year before, and the terms at that time were spelled out specifically. It was only going to be a retail location, and 3 samples of beer, wine, and food would be permitted on site inside the building, but no table being here outside. Then this brings us to the first opportunity to be able to get it right. About a year later, the neighbors saw tables and chairs out on the sidewalk. Put that up with the city. Mr. Batchelder issued the letter you see there in December of 22, citing him for a zoning violation for having capital tables and chairs outside. And that was the first appeal here. Basically they appealed from Mr. Batchelder's zoning violation decision. And next one, you probably recall that Mr. Batchelder's decision was that. That takes us then to July of last year, when the applicant decided to request a reduction in private parking. And, the neighbors, that's probably the meeting, you know, number one, that you remember. Neighbors, turned out to oppose, and this is a slide from that presentation showing the people that opposed it, because of situations like this, no parking in the area, there was a restaurant across the street that was granted a variance a number of years ago, I think for green spaces, and I got just a couple of slides here showing what you probably remember, which is parking problems day and night in the city. It's very heavily congested, parking is a problem all the time. And just next, if you scroll through the next couple of slides, people loading and unloading, more parking, I think like again, evening shot, so the parking congestion. I'm sure I'm telling you something you know, but this is a sensitive area because of the transition from the commercial part of East Bay Street to the residential part. This is really in the crosshairs of that. And so the neighbors are very concerned about all of these impacts in their neighborhood from this proposed use. So now we're back again, but this time, you can advance the slide. Parking variance was denied by the wind. Back in September. Now we're here for what really is an even more impactful. As you saw in the prior presentation, now we have the space closest to Elliott Street that has been added to this equation. And a little over 400 square feet of outdoor space, which for Mr. Moon in particular is directly across Elliott Street from his house. And so those plans were improved, and I took this directly from the approved plans. Approved for interior outfit, retail and restaurant. 9 spaces, 11 required, and the 2 grandfathered that we heard about. So the reason that the approval should not be upheld are these. First, you heard Mr. Batchelder explain what was going on at this location and his conclusion that even though 11 spaces were required, there were 2 grandfathered from a prior use. The lease that was attached to the application, and it's very small, and I apologize, I think we have to make it bigger. Doesn't specify a particular number of spaces. What we got is just a description of the TMS number that it was leased, and you saw this picture before. What we have is not a diagram or a scale drawing showing that there are even 9 navigable spaces. What we have is this aerial photograph with some numbers written on the top. And next slide. This is a section from the ordinance 54-316, and there's a lot of text there, but as I read that section, it requires at the end applications for determining compliance with this will include a scale site plan showing the existing and proposed location of structures, trees, monuments, signs, and other improvements, and the location of existing and proposed parking. And so I think the first reason that this approval should stand is the applicant didn't meet its factual burden of proof by showing that they actually have 9 spaces big. What we've got is an aerial photograph with numbers in it. And I understand and appreciate Mr. Batchelder's explanation of how it was determined. But based on the history of this particular location and the fact that this has gone from a retail location to a restaurant with outdoor seating, I think that question is just too important to be left to any conjecture and speculation. I think the standard requires that any conclusion factually that is reached has to be supported by the evidence. And it's not our burden to come forward with the evidence, it's the applicant's. And I think what we have here is is just lacking and it doesn't meet the requirements of the statute. The second reason we believe that this approval should not be upheld is section 54-110. And again, I won't read it to you folks because I already hear about it every 2 weeks. But I think the significant part here is that this is a change from an existing non-conforming use, in my view, which is a retail space without sufficient parking, to another non-conforming use, which is a restaurant space with insufficient parking. And again, 54-110 provides us with general guidance, but I think the guidance is when anybody changes from one non-conforming use to another, they've got to come here and ask for a special exception. And part of that is they've got to show what they want to do. The new non-conforming use is more appropriate to the district, not less. And in this case, we have no advertised special exception. We have no showing that we meet the special exception requirement here. And I think the reason number 2 that this approval should be reversed is 54-110 requires a special exception. None was asked for. And then finally, I think that under the statute, the parking that has been provided does not qualify under 54-319. And one of the things that Mr. Batchel highlighted was his explanation for the passage of that ordinance. And as I heard him and understand this, the reason this ordinance exists is to prevent restaurants from basically jumping up or jumping down, whichever direction you're going, King Street, and invading and infringing on residential areas. And I agree with Mr. Batchel, those slamming doors, people talking at midnight when they're getting into their cars is bothersome and it is a nuisance. And it is something that people trying to enjoy their homes should not have solved. The focus of the approval is really in the last sentence, which says a lot with residential zoning designation. So the reason that this parking shouldn't qualify is because the intent of this statute was to do just what Mr. Batchel said, which is to protect residents from being infringed upon by resident parking. The problem here, at least from my common standpoint, is the location where those Elliott Street condominiums sit. Some of you probably remember this, but it was an Exxon station a number of years ago. And when the condominiums were built, the zoning, limited business zoning for that parcel was not changed. And so it continues to have the legacy limited business zoning, but it is used as a residence. And you saw the TMS numbers there, and I think they may have even done some photographs, probably maybe. I did not get out of my car and risk life and limb measure Elliott Street, but I'm comfortable that it's not 55 feet wide. That it's probably, if I can measure it on the GIS, about 25 to 30. So the parking wouldn't meet this if those condominiums were zoned for what they're actually used for, which is residence. And so I cited this in the materials, but there is an absurd result exception to the plain meaning rule for ordinance. And I think, Mr. Morrison, your question, I think it's an error of law to interpret a statute consistent with its plain meaning if the result would be absurd. And I think here we do have, because people that live next door to parking in other parts of the city do not have to tolerate this, but because these folks have the services in, if this decision is elevated. So for all those reasons, I appreciate your time and tolerance for my comments. For all those reasons, we ask that you reverse the zoning administrator's decision and not do this.
Ms. Maxline, let me ask you a question while you're there. I understand the first two arguments pretty well. The third argument under section 54-319, it was my understanding that the parking lot. Under the statutory or the ordinance language, the lot used for off-site parking. In fact, it does not adjoin a lot of the residential zoning district.
And you are correct about that, says that it doesn't adjoin a residential zoning designation or be separated from the lot with a residential zoning designation by a right of way that is out here.
So is there across the street residential zone property?
There is not, but there is a residential use of the Elliott Street condominium.
You're arguing that the intent of the section says that it's to protect residentially used properties, whether they're zoned that way or not.
Correct, and my argument is that to interpret it to only apply to residentially designated properties produces really an absurd result, because you have people that use lots like this that are zoned residential, that don't have to live next door to restaurant parking or across a narrow street from restaurant parking. But because these folks who bought the Elliott Street condominiums, I'm not sure they even knew that was zoning in the business until this all came up, but the zoning has never changed. And I think that it shouldn't be just limited to residential zone properties, although I understand, you know, and that's what it says. And I think the considered result exception allows you to interpret it to fulfill the intent of the ordinance and not the precise word.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Maslon. Anybody else want to speak in favor of the appeal? Yes, sir. Please state your name and address for the record.
If I have, I live at 106, East Bay. Did you bring that slide back? The slide and show using the red.
Yeah. I can get there. Oh, there we go.
So right in the middle, 106, that's our place. Our primary residence is on the second floor. And the gentleman just spoke, we are closer to that outdoor seating area than I am to right now. And part of our condominium association, while we're not zoned residential, we're not allowed to occupy a business in there. We were built 22 years ago. So the purpose is for residents. And obviously they're not allowed to be going down to build for residents or commercial space. So the outdoor portion of this thing is extremely onerous to us because we're right there looking at our main living area. And what we thought was a nice part of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matthias. Anybody else would like to speak in support of the appeal? Yes, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Kevin Lee. I live at 21 East LA Street. And I want to assure you that the 9 residents, well, firstly, I want to assure you, I had no idea what the zoning of what I thought was the residence was. I wouldn't have thought in the ordinary course of business, think about that when you're buying a residence. So the other 9 homes in that neighborhood that make up this community have no commercial activity in them. They are completely used 24/7, 365 days a year for livability. My bedroom, front door for my daughter's bedroom on the second, third floor overlook this property. And already the noise that has been associated with their cutting a hole in the courtyard to provide access to what was at one point in time a health spa is creating a difficult situation for us. So in terms of just the livability and the harm that would cause me, in terms of the enjoyment of the life I had in that house and have had for 15 years with 2 young daughters, I want to tell you this would be a disastrous outcome if this is not changed. So just from the point of view of an individual, this had been a jewelry store and then a bric-a-brac store open from 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock in the morning and closed at 4 or 5 o'clock at night, perfectly fine. But to change that thing to say alcohol is going to be served, not only with food, but to who knows what hours of time. For individuals who have already violated the original zoning and have very little credibility in the community based on their past behavior, is something that really concerns me in terms of my ability to enjoy what I thought would be somewhere I could live for a long, long time. So thank you for hearing me out on that. I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. Anybody else like to speak in favor of the appeal? Yes.
My name is Dan Miller. I live at 109 East Bay, AKA otherwise known as Prince's Row, right across the street from the current liquor store, the current beer and wine store, and potential future expansion to the restaurant and retail. I've been at all three of these meetings, zoning board meetings, that we're not going to rehash any of the data there. But I want to support my immediate neighbors and say all 18 units, I'm an HOA president, all 18 units owners are strongly in opposition of this moving forward. My name was referenced in some of the lawyers' emails that he posted. Those are my emails to my board and my owners for some of the history. So if you have any questions about that, I'm certainly answer this question. Thank you.
Did you know you were moving into a zoning, within business and we've all?
No.
And you say no,
It's 18 condominiums.
but I mean, the history of Walker Avenue property, must have been well known.
Well, then I had a bad real estate agent. So, but it's 18 units and I'm personally right up front. So I see it all day long. And when they put the tables and chairs out there illegally without the city approval, or the city gave them approval, but it was a mistake. That created a lot of issues in the neighborhood. We already live in what I consider Disneyland. It's tour central all day long, all day. This is what we're taking place.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Anybody else to speak in favor of the appeal?
I wasn't gonna speak, I was just, my purpose happened. Can you put up the parking?
Your name, say your name.
I'm sorry, Noah Schaefer. Yeah, go.
Yes.
Yeah,
And your address?
is I live in, 32 Bedell. This right here, the fact they're trying to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cars in here. This part right here is now a golf cart. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the blue golf cart driven by a big guy with a beard and everything. He can barely get out of here. Like, if you start parking like trucks or SUVs in here, like Mr. Batchelor, I'm sorry, pronounce your name. When he mentioned part of the rules, so people can't hear doors, banging and keys, whatever. This is gonna be like deep central. People are gonna be sitting on their front because they can't get out of this space. They can't get out of this space because there's a truck right here, there's an SUV right here. And there is no way, there is just no way. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Anybody else to speak in favor of the appeal? Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Bob Bowen, and I've spoken previously during the subject. I just want to.
And your address, I'm sorry.
Hmm?
Your address, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm 102 East Bay. So I'm on East Bay, the far side, on the board. And we've owned this unit since 2012. I'm the managing director of the regime, and all of the members of the regime are opposed to this use. I would just like to say that I don't know how zoning laws are get made, and I don't have any idea how zoning laws get changed. But what I do know is that the master deed of the East Bay and LE regime prohibits commercial use of any of those properties. So in effect, it would be against the laws of the master deed for any commercial operation within that regime that would allow traffic in or out of any units. So as previously stated, these units are residential. in all respects. And I think it's unreasonable for people who have purchased them to think they understand what they're doing. They may have known that it needs to be a gas station, but when we all purchased these units, they were all residential. And if anyone, I received massive prior to purchasing my unit, and I knew that there was no commercial activity to make. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Anyone else who'd like to speak in favor of the appeal? All right, we will hear from the folks who support the zoning administrator's decision.
Thank you so much, Bernie Maybank. Thrilled that the staff has granted the permit, and we know we've taken up a mighty long amount of your time over the last couple of months, and hopefully this will be it here tonight. I wanted to first address what was said by the people who protested. Mayor Riley was very adamant that Charleston should not be turned into Williamsburg. Charleston needs to be a vibrant business community, and he said that just about every time he ran for re-election. We know we don't want commercial infringing on residential, but we don't want residential infringing on commercial either. We thought of, I don't know if we found it, but publication, we are the oldest commercial building in South Carolina. The oldest commercial building in South Carolina, which has got to mean we're the oldest commercial building probably in the Southeast. So what the protestants have done, to complete my analogy from last time, they moved into the next door to the oldest airport in South Carolina and started complaining about the plane noise and trying to shut the oldest airport in South Carolina down. Now they're all living, I'm not a real estate lawyer, but they're all living illegally. They are living in an area zoned commercial. They're living in a residential area. So as a former director of revenue, the first thing I asked myself was, are they paying commercial property taxes or are they paying residential property taxes? And I think we can assume they're paying residential property taxes, and even though they're zoned commercial, and the distinction between residential and commercial, our property tax rates are the highest in the entire United States. I guarantee you they are paying residential on property zoned commercial. Mr. Matsalon said, well, they didn't know, may not have known they were zoned commercial. Can you imagine the lawyering that went on when they bought properties for residential or commercial? Can you imagine what the seller's lawyers told them and got them to sign? So, hey, you're moving into a commercial building. You think that just was slid under the rug by the seller? Third of all, they didn't provide any parking when that building was built. The Womble Law Firm, which is 2 doors down from us, when they built it, or when they approved it, they put parking there. And these buildings, they didn't provide one spot of parking, obviously that would cut down on their profit margin. So they're in here, they are infringing on a commercial area. They're infringing on the oldest commercial building in South Carolina. When they moved there, it's been commercial our entire life. Now, and for them to say they didn't know it was a commercial, I can just imagine the paperwork they had to sign that the lawyer drafted, alerting them that they were moving into commercial. So to go over the parking spots, and I don't know what legal significance this is, but I did want to point it out. Those parking spots have been in my family for over 125 years. I don't know when they came into the family, but I'm 68, and they've been in our family a lot longer than I've been alive. My great grandfather, and actually might have been my great grandmother, bought the 2 buildings, the building that we're in now, and the building directly next to it, which has the parking spots. He lived till he was 97, and then they gave it to my grandfather inherited. He lived till he was 96. And my grandfather didn't die until in the 80s, and the property was divided up between my mom and her sister. And then when the sister died, Albert Simmons, who is the current owner now, owns it. But it's been in the family over 125 years. They live across the street in property zoned commercial. When we all grew up, that property wasn't literally commercial, it was a filling station. And for them to come in, living on property owned by a filling station, saying that the oldest commercial building in South Carolina can't have 400 feet, you know, that's all we are, 400 square feet, vastly smaller than this room. That we cannot have sell a sandwich is just incredible, particularly where they didn't provide any parking when they built their particular building. So with that, I'm gonna turn it on to Theron, who's going to give some of the watering part of it.
I don't know about that. Well, I appreciate y'all hearing us again. I know we've confronted y'all a lot of time, taken a lot of your time, and you know. And I'm not gonna rehash a lot of old stuff, but I do want to correct some things that were said about us to make sure that, you know, I know that you've heard this before, but I just want to make sure that you understand. We never operated with sidewalk tables illegally. We actually, there's a copy of our permit on the screen. We actually received a permit from zoning. Zoning notified us later that they issued it in error. Immediately, we withdrew, we pulled out the sidewalk tables. That's when we appealed our CO that was issued to us. If we can go to the next slide. And when the packet that I passed out has a list of people that have supported us, the petition that was signed, no one was really asked to sign it. We just had it out. People volunteered to sign it. I've been seeing the screen that they put up showing the people that support us. It's not accurate because we actually have a whole list of people. There are so many letters in that packet I gave you. It doesn't even include everything. I mean, me and Bernie had a hard time getting to this meeting today, and I printed off what I could. But we have the majority of Rainbow Row. We have the first 3 homes on Rainbow Row all support us, which are the closest to us. The ones that are against us, when you walk out of our store, you can't even see their house. It's far down to the left. But as you can see from this map, we logged approximately 25% of the addresses that were on the list. Some of them, and of course, you know, other people live and shop with us that want to support us that don't live in this area, but we log the addresses that were relevant. If we can go to the next one, I'd appreciate it. This is a list of 2 names that signed our petition. One of them is Mrs. Colleen Mooney. She signed it. She lives at 21 East Elliott Street. She supported our business. She was in shopping with us. We also have, we were just told that no one at Printers Row supports us. That's not true. Christensen, her son actually worked for us for a long time. They support us. I had a conversation with them saying that they felt pressured into signing something saying that they didn't support us. But as you can see from this, these people freely signed this. They wrote their names, their addresses. So if you can go to the next slide, please. The pictures that you saw with all the trucks and stuff like that, that's a commercial loading zone. We have nothing to do with that. You can see from the sign right in front of 109 Printers Row that it says it's a 30-minute commercial loading zone. That happens regardless of what we do. And most of those trucks are from One Broad and from other businesses on Broad Street where they can't find parking, they'll pull in there. But that's something that needs to be taken up with the city if that's an issue. That's not our problem. We actually have plenty of room for trucks that deliver to our business to find space to deliver stuff. But we don't really get that many deliveries, especially with one with a new location with food and stuff like that. If we can go to the next slide, please. It's been alleged that we're not a conforming use. One of the arguments was that we're going from a non-conforming use to a non-conforming use. It's not true. Actually, retail is a conforming use. We have parking. Restaurant is also a conforming use, as you can see from this chart here. It is limited to certain hours. One thing that you should know, and you probably already know, there are already safeguards in place to protect homeowners. There are noise ordinances. There are times that we can operate. All of those are in place, and we have no intention of violating those. As a matter of fact, right now, we're closing one of our businesses at 7 o'clock every night. The other business is closing at 8 every night. So you can go to the next slide, please. I did get zoning verification letters from the city for all of the properties that are in question regarding them being residential commercial.
the city did confirm through the zoning letter that they are considered limited business, which is commercial. I know we have Lee here, but you know, I figured, you know, we get the letters in addition. And if you go 2 more slides, that's another zoning verification letter. Now, here's something that I want to point out to you. On the first page of the handout that I gave you, they are interpreting the statute to say that you cannot have a parking lot within 55 feet of a residential unit, right? Now, regardless, none of these units are designated as residential. They're all designated as commercial. And in my opinion, our parking lot is on the same lot of record as our business because there's no, our lots connect. And our lease with our current business, we actually incorporated our lease. Now, they mentioned that parking spaces aren't mentioned in our lease for the other land. It's because we're leasing the whole lot. We're not leasing parking spaces. We are actually leasing the entire piece of land. So that's what our deal is with the owner, Bernie's cousin. So what we did, we took that lease, we incorporated it into our current lease, and in our opinion, it is on the same lot of record. So nothing else should matter. And I asked Lee for that. Lee came back to me and said, no, I don't think it's that way. We need a 10-year lease. I said, okay, well, let me go try and get a 10-year lease. And that's what I did. We provided him with a 10-year lease. He was satisfied with it. It is within 400 feet. However, if we get down to the bottom and to discuss what they were saying regarding the residential part, if you look at this first page, everyone knows that when you use the word and, it means both. When you use the word or, it means either or. We taught that as kids. We're taught that in law school. We all know that. The statute specifically says under, I broke it down if you look at the sheet that I gave you, but it says that it shall not adjoin the lot with a residential zoning designation, which ours does not. So really it ends there because we meet that requirement. It says, or, and in my opinion, the way this should be interpreted is if you are connected to a residential lot, your parking lot has to be more than 55 feet away from the residential area. So, because there are instances where a lot connects to a residential lot and there needs to be a buffer there. That's what this is for. So, but we don't even get there for one reason, they're zone commercial. But number 2, we are not connecting to a residential lot. So, I did want to point out one more thing in the second sheet that I gave you. There is a lot that's connected to their units already. There's no buffer. It actually, I mean, there's a row of bushes, but that's it. The lot's probably 5 times the size of our lot. And then if you'll go one more slide, that might be good. Yeah, let's go. So what we've done so far is, this hasn't come up, but just so you know, we're not required to have those parking spaces yet. So what we've agreed to do is instead of kicking people out of parking, we agreed to let them continue to pay and park. There are no leases in place for anyone who parks there. We're going to continue to let them pay and park to meet the spaces, and then we will provide them to our clients when we need them. We don't have our CO yet because we started construction. As soon as we do, we will, we will stop allowing people to pay and park. And if you'll go one more. This is further proof that our part of what was alleged in the complaint or in the appeal is that our lease was a sham. This is proof that it's not. This is where I've been paying the bill every month. So it's definitely not a sham. And then I think that's about it. I mean, we have really been backwards. I will tell you this, the outdoor area that everyone is referring to, it previously looked like a junkyard. I literally just spent about $25,000 remodeling that space. We continued bluestone from the sidewalks into the courtyard. It is beautiful now. It looks way better than it ever looked. We have landscaped our entire block. The city has neglected that block for years. We've landscaped the entire block. We've been really good neighbors. We plan to continue to be good neighbors. We are not a bar. We keep getting characterized as a bar. There's not a bar in our place. We don't have a place where you can go sit at a bar or anything at all like that. It's a really unique place. And that's what's causing us so much frustration is that it's a very unique business idea. We are a luxury school. To give you an example, last week we had a gentleman come in and bought a $4,000 bottle of wine. Like that's the kind of stuff we sell. We don't sell PBR. We don't sell shots. We have no liquor. We don't sell liquor at all. It's truly a luxury place. I'm working with Callie's Hot Little Biscuit, Harry Warren, to develop a menu. We're going to have small eats.
We're gonna offer caviar, charcuterie, some tinned seafood. That's what we will sell. We're not gonna sell anything fried. We don't have a grease trap. We're gonna be within the limits of the law, and, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sandy. Anybody else to speak? And we'll hear from folks in rebuttal after everybody has a chance to speak on the side of the property owner. Anybody else intend to speak in support of the zoning administrator's decision? Yes, sir.
Good evening, I'm, Sam Howell of Ward Street, and just wanted to speak in favor of the, proposal. In that, I live at Greenwater, I walk or drive that block around in all this Broad Street every day, the weekends too, I mean, at least 4 times a day, I'm through that area, pretty much. And, it will improve with more commerce there. Was that intersection of Broad and East Bay and Exchange Street is dominated by bureaucratic buildings or your buildings that are basically closed at night. The old Exchange building and the Wells Fargo Bank building. It's not well lighted at night either. For example, my wife and I walk up to go to a restaurant on Broad or on East Bay Street, and she genuinely is nervous about walking through that section. I don't know why it is, but there's some street lights, but it's just dark. I don't know if the trees block the light or what, but it's just very dark at night. And just to have some commercial activity going on, some livelihood there, some people coming and going, would make the whole area a lot more, I think, livable than it is now. And so I would urge you to support this and let it move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. Anybody else would like to speak in favor of the zoning administrator's decision?
Hey, Jonathan Alba, I live at 4 Gillen Street. I'm also the president of the Gillen Homeowners Council. I would like to express our support for Mr. Sandy's operation. We agree that this will add to the neighborhood. Some years ago, we all decided to allow for 10 Gillen Street to have a very similar property with exceptions as well. We thought that was going to be great. I owned the building 6-8 Gillen at the time, and that was directly attached to my residence. And you all allowed that to happen at that point in time. I thought it was a good idea then. I think it's similarly a good idea for the neighborhood, someplace that we can walk to and not have to get the car, deal with everything that's going on up King Street. I think that some of the representations that have been made by those opposed to it has been a little bit disingenuous because of the time frame that this has been going through the process. The one Broad has been allowed to be opened up. And that's directly attached to some of the buildings. And there have not been any issues with one Broad, and nobody's complained about that. So I don't see why this would be any different than one Broad being opened up in the time frame that Mr. Sandy's been working on this project. So from our perspective, we'd like to support the efforts for going on. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Alba. Anybody else who'd like to speak in favor of the administration?
My name is Edward Pritchard. I am a lifelong resident of Charleston, a lifelong resident of North Charleston Street, so I'm familiar with the area. I do think this is actually a good plan for the property, given the nature of that area of the street and how it has been over many years. And I originally just came just to speak in support of it. I heard a few troubling legal issues. It came out tonight, and I would like to point out because they could become broader problems if not dealt with. And first was, it's not really an issue. Y'all were discussing earlier, the standard on appeal. This is a legal matter. As such, it's you don't have to live review. This is a question of law. It's not a question of equity. It's pretty well set forth in town, but this would therefore have to be based on the sensitive evidence test. It's not a question of review. The second, and this dovetails into the problem that I heard, is who has the burden of proof? I agree that the applicant would initially have the burden of proof. But Mr. Batchelder has found that he met it. This is therefore an appeal, and the appellant has the burden of proof, not the respondent. I mean, that's just black letter law. So therefore, they have the burden of proving that it wasn't met, not vice versa. And that's just straight black letter law. I mean, I'm having so many appeals, I can't count them. And imagine if you had a verdict, in favor of the defendant, and the plaintiffs were feeling that. And the plaintiff couldn't say that the defendant had the burden of proof, they have the burden of proving their appeal. And so I think the burden is on them. The other troubling aspect is the interpretation of the zoning ordinance itself. It says what it says. And the intent of the ordinance is to be gleaned from its plain language. And if it can't be gleaned from its plain language, then you move on into other areas of statutory construction. Well, it says straight up, commercially zoned property. And it's commercially zoned property. That's a fact. There's no getting around it. There's no disputing it. And I think it'd be very troubling to read into a statute an intent that's not there. City council could have written it next to property that's currently being used for residential purposes, but it didn't. It didn't choose to write it that way, and therefore you have to accept what city council put into the ordinance. That's just straight up black letter statutory construction. I mean, there's no getting around it. And I do understand the aspect of the master deed, but if you think about that, that too is troubling, because you can't let a private agreement essentially negate or change zoning ordinance. Because how often would that go on? I mean, that's essentially the argument there is we've entered into this voluntary agreement, and therefore we've changed the nature of the use of the property. Well, that doesn't meet the test. That's not close. I mean, people would do that all day, every day if they could. They would just simply enter into voluntary agreements, change the nature of use of the property, and therefore change the intent of the zoning ordinance, and you just can't do that. And so as I sat here and I listened to this, I thought, golly, if any of this were accepted, it would be problematic from a legal perspective, and it would cause problems for you guys later on down the line. And I think you need to deal with the standard on appeal, the burden of proof, and the statutory language, and just crystal clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. Anybody else in favor of the zoning administrator and the property owner? All right, we'll give an opportunity for rebuttal to the appellants.
I've got a couple of comments. So I heard last, and then Mr. Mooney, I think first, I guess beginning at the end, I just point out that one of the questions on the variance special exception application, as you folks well know, is the property restricted by any recorded covenant which is contrary to or conflicts with the proposed use. And so, again, the argument that is not relevant to matters that come before this board, I think, is not correct, because people that if they came in and asked for a use that was prohibited by restricted covenants, they wouldn't even be allowed to come here and check yes to that box. You folks would not allow them to use it planted in private covenants. As far as the arguments about the standard, I won't belabor this, but my understanding of the standard of review is that you review matters of legal conclusions for errors of law, and factual matters, see if there's any evidence that supports it. And just to clarify, my argument under the change from one non-conforming use to another, and under the statute about that describes the location of off-street parking, I think there's a legal mistakes that we've done in this story. The factual argument was when the applicant came and applied for
the license, he had the burden to prove that he had sufficient parking. My argument there was not that the applicant has the burden of proof on appeal, but that there's no evidence from which the conclusion that there is adequate parking could be based. We just have an aerial photograph of numbers on it and not sufficient. So,
And
but
I understand we're gonna hear from Mr. Mooney in a second, but while you're up there, I've got a couple questions for you. Mr. Maslon, first of all, is the property conforming or non-conforming with respect to the use that has been permitted and now appealed?
If the question, and I know people hate to ask lawyers questions, and I have lawyers, define the question, but if the question is, does the current zoning allow retail or a restaurant? My answer is yes. My argument on non-conforming use is it was non-conforming because it was retail without sufficient parking, and it is going to be used as restaurant without sufficient parking. But I'm not arguing that retail or restaurant is not allowed by the current zone. Hopefully that is.
I understand. Okay.
So that's your 54-1 Kenmore.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
And then I guess I'll let you two on this, while we're listening to Mr. Mooney. It is, interesting to me that, in the section relating to, powers of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Well, why don't we'll get back to that in a minute. Let's hear from Mr. Mooney.
Yeah, I think you just have one fact for the matter that you want.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that my wife did not sign the document suggesting that she approves the opening of the restaurant with the courtyard. She signed the document supporting the retail beer store. So I just felt like that needed to be clarified. Thanks.
Okay. All right, well, let me ask, I don't know who's the spokesperson, maybe it's you, Mr. Maybank, for the opposition to the appeal. But I didn't hear any response on the deficiency alleged in the application, i.e. Mr. Maslon's first argument, which was, I think, based upon section 54-316, that applications must include scaled site plan, location of existing and proposed parking. Is that something that you feel like you did submit, you didn't submit, but you didn't need to? What is your response to that argument?
We feel like we did submit that. I think that, anytime we worked with the Indian office in the past, if our application was insufficient, they always came back to us to ask for more information. Dealt that up front. So, we do feel like we submitted enough information for Mr. Backley to make that decision. He explained how he made that decision. And I will tell you, this lot has always been parking. It's been parking way before we started taking it over. We're actually going to, I did indicate how many parking spaces are on there, but we're not required to have that many spaces. We're actually going to reduce the number of spaces that are written on that diagram, meant to mention that earlier as well. But so we're only required to have 9 spaces right there. We're going to reduce that tonight.
You master lease the entire lot.
That's right. Our lease doesn't say anything about spaces. We are responsible for the entire lot, which does connect. I mean, there's a lot line, but it does connect to our front lot.
And I saw an email here that I'd like to hear some explanation of from you, Mr. Sandy. The email is from Brunson Miller, and it looks like it's written to various folks who are leasing the parking spots now in that lot. And it says that, we've gone to great lengths to ensure this is a smooth transition and everyone can continue on as they have been. Does that mean that there are parking leases in place on that lot that you all don't have exclusive control over or would be unable to use? Tell me what that means.
And I do apologize for not addressing that. I didn't even address that as well. That email was sent out to let everyone know that you're not gonna be kicked out today. I told Brunson and Bernie's cousin, he lives in New York, that are eventually, I mean, part of the reason why we negotiated such a high amount, because it's a lot, what we're paying for these parking spaces. Was so that we could control it completely. And they had no leases in place. It was a pay to park situation. And so I said, Brunson said, listen, we don't want people calling us tomorrow saying you kicked it out of their lot. I said, well, we don't need it now. We still have to get first the city approved after a permit issue. And we have to do construction. We have a lot to do. So we're probably going to be 6 to 12 months out before we do anything. And it's already been 6 months. I also told Brunson that for people that really need it, that I would work with them to find parking around our area, because I have additional parking. If you remember from previous meetings, from my law practice, which is in that area, I have 7 or 8 spots that I am considering letting certain people take at a much lower price than what they were paying previously. And so that is what that email was. There is nothing existing at all. And I've sent subsequent emails out to people to let them know, hey, this is the deal, you know, you continue to park here. I did clear with you first, I did include a copy of that email, with even slides or the fact that maybe, but I did clear with you first. It kind of made sense to like get people out immediately if you find a car to show the spaces yet, and that's what you can say.
So, and so what you're telling us is, and representing us, is that there are no short-term leases on that parking spot for the individuals that would be in place or affect or impair your exclusive control over that lot.
And as an attorney, I don't think that likely, I would be willing to, I mean, I don't know, I mean, you can take my word for it, I'd be happy to sign an affidavit because of that. And I mean, Albert, I'm sure would verify as well, Bronson could, you know, tell you like this. And Bernie.
Okay.
And one more thing, sir.
Yeah,
I'll
please.
tell you, there is a gentleman in this building, in this room that parks there, and you can ask him if he has a lease, and he'll probably tell you he doesn't.
I think we've had a lot of discussion on this matter, so I hope that everybody feels like they've had the opportunity to speak. We're going to go ahead and discuss this matter on the board at this point. Lee, we've heard a lot, but the primary arguments from the appellants appear to be the applications didn't use the scale site plan under 54.316. The going from a non-conforming to a non-conforming triggers this provision that requires BZA review under section 54-110. And the argument under 54.319 that the parking lot should not adjoin a lot that is residentially zoned, or as interpreted by the appellants, residentially used. So those are that's a summary of the 3 arguments. And back to Howell's original question, I believe that the zoning ordinance and our duty is to correct an error of the zoning administrator. Now, there's certain language about whether the board misapprehended, and that's all related to reconsideration. When the applicant comes before us for reconsideration, it has that specific language that we're to review for an error of law made by the zoning administrator. And so, Lee, you want to give us the city's position on these three specific issues. First of all, we can deal with the,
That's good.
yeah, please, go ahead.
Question, one question.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding this. 54-110 argument, it's sounding to me from what Mr. Maslon responded with the 54-110 argument. Really segues from 54-316, it's the same issue of that parking issue. If I understood, the argument is that the non-conformity, the existing non-conformity ties directly to the parking.
Right.
issue.
I understood that too.
I just don't know if they're different questions or really the same question. Anyway.
In other words, the use is only non-conforming as a result of the existing conditions, without the parking. Correct. In other words.
Well,
it
yeah,
would
yeah, I
be a
think that would-
conforming use.
If you want to
Parking
view it
was
that way,
sufficient.
sure. Yeah. So the 3 points. So,
Was the application deficient?
right, and in my opinion, it was not. If somebody was trying to build a new parking area somewhere, then we would look at scale plans and that entails possibly curb cut issues and landscaping and all that sort of thing. But this is an existing paved parking lot in use. And it's very easy for me to look at, because it's a small area, and see that it's sufficient to provide 9 spaces. The diagram, I think this diagram, just going back to through all these slides to the beginning. So this diagram shows you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 spaces. And that probably would be questionable, but certainly 9 spaces, I think, are easily accommodated on the property. Again, I can look at the measurements of the property. I can look at the street view and see what's there. And so to me, that looks compliant, and I don't see a need to get a scale drawing to indicate what I already see.
Whose notes are these on the drawing?
These are the notes from the
Application?
application for the, this was submitted with the lease.
Okay, when the note that says parking spaces 1 and 2 do not count, what does that mean?
Well, I told them I'm not going to count those because number one, of course, we have the tavern space up here. And so I view this as one legal parking spot because you could pull a car in here off of Exchange Street, I think that is, yeah. But stacking the spaces like that, that's not really compliant. So I view that as one space, and I view that as being a requirement of this existing business that's been there for a long time. So that's why I said I'm not going to count those. But you still need 9 spaces, and they represented that they could meet that here
I
and
suppose
said
the
9
question
spaces.
is, on the first issue, did the zoning administrator err and not requiring a detailed scaled site plan for the 9 parking lots, or was he able to exercise his discretion in order to determine that 9 spots would fit in that lot? All right.
Okay, second question. Change to a non-conforming use and whether that needs to come before you for a special exception. So again, I look at this as a conforming use as a retail space, and changing to a conforming use as a restaurant space. The parking is not compliant with the zoning requirement for the retail use, and we grandfather those spaces, and then we allow that grandfathering to carry forward to whatever use is proposed, assuming that use is conforming to the zoning of the property. So this happens all the time. This has just been a standard practice of how we viewed the section 54-110 and whether it did apply. Of course, we do have properties that are not zoned for the uses that are there. And in those cases, if they do want to change the use to something else, then they have to come before the board.
So let's assume that this was a residentially zoned property or some zoning that was incompatible with the current use. Them changing it from retail to a restaurant use, which would similarly not be permitted under the current zoning, that would trigger the special exception requirement under 110, right?
That's correct.
But the city at least does not view the lack of parking for a particular use as a non-conformity.
Right. We don't view that as deeming it to be a non-conforming use of the property.
Okay.
So thirdly, the residential, well, the use of this parking and whether the use across East Elliott Street should disqualify the opportunity to lease the parking here in this lot. And so back to what I was saying before, we didn't include, section 319 did not include this particular language in it up until about 2017, roughly. And we were having issues with restaurants moving further up King Street into areas where we had commercial on the street, but beyond that, it was residentially zoned and residentially used, and people were complaining about the impacts. And I was hearing those complaints. I was hearing the complaints from city council members. I was hearing a lot. So, and I'm not a huge fan of restaurant operators because they're the most difficult to try and rein in. So I've had a lot of experience with that. And that's not to group all of them together because there are some wonderful operators in this town, but there are a lot of them that I have challenges with. And so I just want to try and rein those uses in reasonably with improved requirements. And that's what I was attempting to do when I drafted the amendment to add that language. So I wrote the language and added that, and I was clearly intending to disqualify parking if it was adjoining a residentially zoned area or within close proximity to a residentially zoned area. And the reason for that is that we have a lot of commercial areas that have residential uses as well as commercial uses in them. And we've also had discussions amongst the board over what's a residential area and what isn't a residential area. And it's very difficult to determine truly what is a residential area in many instances. In this instance, maybe not, but in some instances, it's difficult to determine when a commercially zoned area is a residential area. And I want clear subjective rules to apply when I'm using this requirement, and the zoning designations of property make it very clear on what should be disqualified versus what's qualified. So I use that term intending to disqualify residentially zoned properties or parking lots within close proximity to residentially zoned properties.
And if you had, there was nothing let me ask you this way. Why didn't you, instead of residentially zoned, why didn't you prepare the draft to say residentially used?
Well, because again, I first of all, I don't know in a commercially zoned area, I don't know where all the residential units are. I might guess, but I don't always know. And I'm looking at things through our zoning maps, through our aerial photography, through our records through the assessor's office and things like that, and that's not clear to know exactly what the use of a particular property is. So I don't know where residential units are located. I don't necessarily know how to distinguish between a commercial area and a residential area. It might be clear here, but it's not clear in a lot of areas. And you have buildings that have mixed uses. And so is that a residential area or is that a commercial area? So it becomes very difficult. And I don't like to get into these kind of debates. So I want to try and make the rules as clear as possible when I write amendments. And that's what I was attempting to do here.
Any other questions for Lou, for the city? Mr. Maslin, I've got something else for you. Can you point us to some portion or provision in the zoning ordinance that would state that that the lack of parking renders a use non-conforming?
The answer is no. I looked, and actually created an email with Lee about, what the basis of the decision was, and it was just the general, non-conforming use statute. But if I may comment, again, I think the logic is circular because he says that the use is conforming, but he is grandfathering 2 spaces under the non-conforming use statute. And so to me, if it's conforming, then there's no basis for grandfathering 2 spaces. Because, you know, again, to me, that's the problem in the whole in the logic is, if you ask me to ignore the parking and just comment on the use, you know, I think the uses are allowed in limited business, but there wouldn't be anything to grandfather if it was conforming. Your grandfathering 2 spaces under 54-110, because it's not conforming, I think. Now, and the other thing I'll mention just quickly is on the parking requirement, I believe that there is a separate ordinance that applies to new parking lots. And the one that I cited does not apply to new parking lots, it applies when there is a change. And so I would mention that in response to the comment about the draft for new parking, I believe there's a separate ordinance.
Would you go back to Mr. Masline's presentation about his first issue about the parking plan? It was just a second to the language.
This.
No, sorry.
Okay, I was talking about that. So my question to you is, when you're approving applications, you know, at the staff level, is this something that you might do is just eyeball the lot and?
Yeah.
But because typically I think that we usually see this now, here, so I think.
Yeah, it's a judgment on my part. This is a small little parking lot versus a larger lot.
Oh, I might add to you just, you know, documentation standpoint. But you need to parking, clear those spaces. Get away from one now. In that lot. One more little condition with this, maybe when you're there, to your knowledge, are there any trees, monuments, signs, or other improvements inside the parking lot area?
Not to my knowledge.
So what about Mr. Medlon's circular logic, non-conforming grandfather?
Well, that's a good point. I will acknowledge that. Again, I go back to, I guess I was following what my predecessor had done. And we've done this numerous times over the years because space has changed. So for instance, a Broad Street location that was an office and the ground floor changes to an art gallery, there's an increased parking requirement for that. And maybe they're able to satisfy it. Or maybe it's not an increase because of the size of the space, but it's a change from one use to another use, and we carry forward grandfathering and making those decisions, whether it's a retail space on King Street going to a restaurant or a restaurant going to retail. And that's, all those changes between different types of commercial uses have occurred in different locations. And that's how we've applied the standards.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a few concluding remarks?
We're still in our deliberative mode here, and I think I understand your position. We do have the luxury of having the city attorney here today. And so I don't know if anybody would feel it would be appropriate to speak with her about a couple of the legal issues that have been raised. I know I would support a brief conference with her, but that'd be up to the board as to whether or not you want to join the motion, go to executive session to discuss legal matters. If somebody's prepared to make such a motion, the majority of the board wants it done. I'll make a motion. Go into executive session. All right, is there a second? Ms. Grass seconds the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed. We're gonna meet with the city attorney in executive session for a few minutes.
I'm gonna just.
No, don't touch it.
That's what we'll do.
Hopefully or something like that. I'll get in case I have to leave. Anybody has a problem getting out of the garage, make sure they tell Lee tomorrow. I'll refund the money or whatever. But there's a black button on there, they can call.
Okay.
Get out. And if that doesn't work, they have to pay. I'm sure they can tell them.
Okay.
Call Lee tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll get it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
It's not found in the Bay of. But here, I think we're talking more
And with the arch. One thing. I don't think
Their grandfather with 2 spots, I'm down to 9. And give them 1 spot. Came over and said, like, my guy was walking out, because these are obvious residents, and these weren't like church. You guys definitely have enough to find. All right. Are we?
Use the bond, okay. I mean. Two of us, we're gonna give them the right back.
Yeah.
It's your right.
Oh, Tell me if I'm missing something. I think they're great. Thank you. rational, that only the person properly in consideration on the application, not the only person. Or the only, especially for the sector or this has to be done. I'm sorry. It is saying not to if you never not what to use, if you're not going to be not the government, if you're not going to use these things, if you're not going to be one side. But I think it's more, as well as more, anybody want to get around, not up. How many spot, so if I know, they can see that. See, it's not the issue, it's just not scaled wrong. The issue is only the prevention. We have to build the stand, but let's build the state. The problem is, it's still on the way to the property, it's a safety of all. Right. If we use that, if we use it, if we use the property, we can't do that. I know, if it's like a, why did they do it, originally, there had to be a reason why the developer didn't do it. Why did that stuff be allocated and burn it up, but it's over, and it was really, actually, the quality of the guys, they were able to go back into what they used. They're like, okay, that, or something, actually, or I don't know, we should never be able to do it. Well, you know, the other one, my only comment is that, when the data was very important, they use it as good shots, but I don't think it was, I think a lot of what you teach them. One of the things I highlight is really represent some of the. So I think I can buy a. You can now we're going to see some of the more actual there for our truck for out there and live there too. I thought that was the hell was go. You can down there all day long. So yes, our next step would be, there's a lot of the grants, I think there's. They want to do it, they granted one of the grants. And they say, yeah. Maybe. And all the way, oh, and actually, Peter, but we would talk about the next time we talk like that. So I want to take out the bottom. I'll tell you what, I'm going to do all through this. Potentially, why you bring me this here, and show you the work. Right. And then you can.
So. That's it, huh? No. You talk about Los Angeles? One really rather than simplifying on that.
They should.
Right. In both ways, they will not be out. Yes, they're. After our last one, they began. You don't have any business after that. That's exactly true. Yeah, exactly. Honestly, I didn't know how to prepare, so I'm talking. It's funny, like, there was an
And what is the significance of this clipping here? What are they saying you're doing wrong or?
but she absolutely signed.
So bring out oral argument when we have it. We're trying to say that. They're saying our site plan was inadequate?
Yeah, the petition, as I just pointed out to him, he was saying, no.
Chair, I make a motion to come out of the executive session for legal matters, no action was taken. All right, for a second. All right, Mr. Brad seconds the motion, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. All right, the board went into executive session. No action was taken. The board has come out of executive session. The board, would, without revealing any of the legal advice that was received, the board, would find it appropriate, I think, to, entertain a deferral of this matter in order to provide the, owner of the property an opportunity to submit, scaled site drawings in accordance with section 54-316, in order to show with detail, the parking space configuration of that lot and the number of spots that is, that would be able to be placed there under the city's zoning ordinance and in accordance with parking regulations that have been adopted by the city. All right, move to defer, second, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed, the matter is deferred. If you'll work with Lee to get, to satisfy those,
Mr. Chairman, a lot of us couldn't hear
yeah.
what the motion was. You might.
The motion was to defer the application. So we're gonna defer the application and you're gonna have an opportunity to submit the detailed scaled site plan that's called for under section 54-316. All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Make a motion to defer, Jeff, maybe?
You made the motion to defer.
John,
John,
John, thank you. Okay, and then Al, you said, thank you.
thank you.
It's not at the, yeah.
And meeting for all.